All right, it's the System Failure Podcast, number 83.
All right, big number 83, eh, Brian? We did have a 60-degree day yesterday. I got out for my 5Ks I've been running. So I'm pleased that spring seems a little bit more in the air than it did last week when we had to report to our intrepid System Failure listeners that we unfortunately were embroiled in a snowstorm. But we're looking pretty good this week, eh?
Yes, I did run, my first 5K yesterday.
How'd you feel?
Around the bay. Well, it felt very good to be out in the sun.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And, I guess I can just do this tie-in because I went to physical therapy. And
now, this was the first time you'd gone to see the specific doctor, right? You were supposed to go see him a couple weeks ago, but your appointment got bumped?
We got bumped by 1 week.
By 1 week. Okay,
yeah.
So this is your first time visiting the PT. Have I got that right?
Correct.
Okay, all right, take it away.
And, I just went for a run, and I was, able to, breathe through my nose, which is exciting.
The whole run, you were able to breathe through your nose?
Yeah.
All right, interesting. I mean, I usually try to breathe through my nose in all times and places, except exercise.
You, just breathe through... I think ideally you'd probably breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth.
Maybe, but I think that if you are pushing yourself to any sort of athletic, how much aerobic activity can you really be engaged in if you're able to breathe through your nose the whole time? And if you could breathe through your nose the whole time, could you run your 5K fat? Could you get a better time by working harder but having to breathe through your mouth and suck in more oxygen? So maybe it is the right way to do it is to breathe through your nose. But so when sometimes I'll wake up in the night and realize I've been breathing through my mouth and I'll go back to my nose. But I've really got myself trained well. I usually always wake up in the morning still breathing through my nose. But I haven't bothered at all on the running front, so that's interesting. So carry on anyway. So did your PT suggest this to you, or is this just how you always try to?
Well, one thing I learned from my PT, there's this question of how to have good posture, right? Because you may remember growing up, or our parents or chiropractors would be like, hold your head up.
Yes.
And so how do you do that in a way that's actually good? Well, anyway, one thing he was saying is try to keep your windpipe as open as possible. And so that's what I was doing. And my occipitals, those little bones at the top of your spine there, those are called your occipits. Yeah. I don't know, they're terribly messed up. And I guess my ribs are terribly tight and my hamstrings are terribly tight. And I've got all kinds of problems.
Yeah, it'd be easier just to explain which parts of your body are functioning, normally versus because it seems like that's a long list of terrible maladies you got there, Brian.
Yeah, well, if you're in your 30s or 40s or not young anymore, I mean, I imagine most people know what the chronic pain is like, the chronic aches and pains. And so the physical therapy was terribly exciting. I don't know if all physical therapists are good or just the guy I went to. My kung fu person recommended this person, but he just seems to actually know what's going on, which is there's some actual guiding light, and it just I don't know, if you're struggling with good posture, I guess I have to recommend if things just don't sit right, that's a terribly uncomfortable feeling, and I don't know, I know you're a fan of. I don't know, trying to roll it out with an exercise ball.
Yeah, a lacrosse ball.
And I think you can only get so far with that. Yeah. You need to stretch it. I don't know. I've only been to one session. I'm probably going to end up doing 10 more at a considerable expense. But so I guess I'll have to see where I'm at the end. But it was just terribly exciting. And part of the thing is that there's just the nature of I don't know, psychosis wherein it's psychosomatic, right? Or how good you feel about your body affects your mind, right? And so I guess I've tried a lot of I've tried therapists and stuff. I've tried putting dents on the psycho side of the psychosomatic nature of being. And I guess I haven't found anyone who could put a good dent. I've had some good massage therapists. There was that crazy Rolfer lady. You went to her too. I mean, she could get in there and I would feel better for 24 hours. And then my wretched affect would start to, sit back in. So, yeah, man, I don't know. Physical therapy.
Now, do you believe this to be the same physical therapist that I went to 7 or 8 years ago? I think we talked about, we don't want to give his name over the air, obviously. But do we agree that this was the same physical therapist that I went to see, or do you think now that it's someone different?
Well, I don't know.
Interesting.
But I mean, it's the one. If it's the same one that your ex-girlfriend went to see, then I guess it is.
Yeah. I had a girlfriend who went to see this PT, and she said she sobbed with relief at the things that she had. She said she literally had tears because it felt so good to finally get relief after all those years of what you call a wretched affect. So I was excited. I went to see the same guy, but he had me do even the same thing that brought tears to this girl's eyes back in the day. And it just didn't quite do anything for me at all. And so I just kind of because like you say, there's considerable expense. So after 2 or 3 of them, you have to be like, all right, is this helping me? The doctor's not going to let you, they're just going to keep ringing you up for another appointment, right? So you have to kind of be the judge of, is this treatment working or is this treatment not working? And I just felt that it wasn't working. So I'm excited to hear that you are, excited after your first appointment, because I was not so excited. One thing that the PT I went to see told me that I thought was very interesting is he made a very sharp distinction between the hard bones, like your vertebrae and your clavicles and your shoulder blades and your ribs, the hard stuff, the bones, and then all that soft tissue, ligaments and fascia and connective tissue. And he said that there is no such thing as bad posture. So I'm wondering if this sounds familiar to you, and that really your soft tissue is meant to compensate for whatever affect you have. This must not be what your guy was telling you, though.
So our course of discussion just didn't go anything like that.
This must be different then.
Which is funny because you think it would have, because I think we're basically struggling with kind of a similar issue. So yeah, I don't know. If you can just find someone who's like good at what they do. I don't know. We'll see if my opinion turns after I spend a bunch of money and then maybe I just plateau out and don't get anywhere.
Yeah. Well, let's not put that in the universe. I really hope this helps you out, because then I'll go see the same guy if it does.
Well, it was just encouraging, just how much easier it was to breathe. When you're running around the bay yesterday. I mean, I guess part of the pain comes from breathing with your shoulders rather than your diaphragm, and so he recommends taking in longer breaths than feels comfortable, and then holding it, and then exhaling for longer than feels comfortable, and then pausing before breathing again, and that kind of retrains your diaphragm to actually do the breathing rather than using your shoulders to breathe, which it's kind of I think what the pain feels like.
This would not be something you would do during exercising, this type of breathing. This would be something you do to train yourself when you're not running around the bay. Or is it something you're doing whilst running around the bay?
You're not. I think that's just sort of a general practice.
Yeah, that's what it sounds
not
like.
Specifically while exercising, I think.
I see. Now, I really wonder if this is broadly relatable to people, if everyone is wandering around with aches and pains in their back. I feel like they must be, right? Or are we living out some bizarre Greek tragedy because our parents were chiropractors and so we're doomed to have a sore back just because of the way that Greek tragedy works? The thing that made you is also the thing that undoes you, at the same time. I wonder about that. It does seem like no one escapes physical discomfort as they get to their 30s and 40s and beyond, as you say. So maybe it is broadly, relatable. That's an interesting one. Well, I hope your PT man gets you back on the straight and narrow, Brian, and so that I can go too.
Well, I think it must be relatable. I mean, I think everyone must know someone. Or just people. If you're a lot of people are just struggling with pain, right? So I think that it must be relatable in that way. And I think sometimes people act weird when they're in pain because they don't know what to do about it.
It takes away your processing power too. If you're in pain, you're just ow.
And you're looking for something to take that pain away, and so maybe it can give you a questionable relationship to drugs, or maybe just the way you relate to other people. You're trying to use other people to soothe the pain and whatnot. So I don't know. Yep.
Maybe everyone's living out this Greek tragedy, right? Maybe everyone's pain in their 30s and 40s is a specific result of the lifestyle that the way that they were made, has issues that eventually are going to result in you feeling pain as your body wears out as you get old. Everyone's body wears out. That's what we're here for. And so maybe everyone's specific. Maybe ours is, our pain is related to our genesis as people, as the children of chiropractors, and maybe everyone's chronic pain issues are related to their genesis in that way, so that we're all, like Icarus flying too close to the sun or whatever is one of these crazy Greek stories, Antigone.
Well, I remember being at Hebron Academy as a freshman, and then there are these freshmen playing on the varsity hockey team, and the varsity hockey team at Hebron Academy are crazily good.
Yeah, mostly Canadian kids imported.
Yeah, and so the couple freshmen who were varsity were just super developed, and so what lets you execute at that high level? Well, good genetics and other things certainly help. But not being in a state of trauma helps too.
Yeah.
And so just certainly not being in pain is essential to being able to execute at a high level, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I hope that your pain is relieved, Brian, so you can execute at an even higher level. I look forward to the reaping the fruits of that harvest on this very podcast.
Me too.
All right. Well, I suppose that we should now pivot to the big news this week, and that is stock market collapses on because of the Donald's tariffs, eh?
Yeah.
This week's Wall Street Journal article, I just selected one that from yesterday, Friday, that sort of just lays out the basics here. There's a lot of hysteria. I looked on Reddit. There's a lot of hysteria on there. Not really a good place to get a measured reaction to the Donald's tariffs. But obviously you can't watch Fox News either. I don't really know who to turn to. So we'll just make our own opinions here. But I just wanted to start by laying this foundation with this week's system failure article of the week from the Wall Street Journal.
All right, here we go.
This article is entitled "A Market-Rattling Attempt to Make the American Economy Trump Always Wanted." And it's subtitled, "The President Dreams of Factories Reopened and Towns Revitalized by Tariffs. But stocks plunged on fears economic growth will suffer." And so I've just condensed this article down. We'll hit the major beats here. As investors and consumers fretted in recent weeks about the fallout if President Trump unleashed a massive trade war, Trump himself kept looking to the past. "The rest of the world has been ripping off the U.S. for 40 years, he told advisors who asked him to articulate his economic vision. It was, he and his advisors would note, an argument he has been making on television since the 1980s. Before his second term ends, he said he feels he has to right those wrongs. The tariffs Trump announced would lift the average duty above the previous peak of 1930. It is by far the most disruptive component of an agenda that may be one of the most disruptive, if any, new president since the 1930s. One that includes slashing immigration, government spending, taxes, and regulations. Wall Street assumed Trump would prioritize growth-friendly tax cuts and deregulation while delaying and diluting tariffs as he did in his first term. Instead, Trump decided to administer shock treatment immediately. The economy, he argued, is a sick patient that needs therapy now, regardless of the pain. Quote, "The patient lived and is healing. The prognosis is that the patient will be far stronger, bigger, better, and more resilient than ever before," unquote. He wrote on social media Thursday. Trump's aides see the tariff rollout as part of a comprehensive program, along with tighter borders, lower taxes, and less regulation that will result in a more self-sufficient economy where Americans produce more and import less of what they consume, fewer jobs are filled by immigrants who came illegally, the private sector is freer, and the government less burdensome. So there you have it. I did have a chance to listen to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on Tucker Carlson's dubious podcast that dropped yesterday. And the way they're framing this is in the populist language. I think Scott Bessent even was citing the figure that the top 10% own 88% of all equities or stocks in this country. And then the next 10% own the rest. And then the bottom 50% have nothing or in terrible debt. So they're trying to frame this in an economically populist way. But as you noted on the pod last week, Brian, there's no chance that it seems like turning our Titanic economic ship around and repatriating all these industries that moved overseas and trying to build back the middle class that way. Well, it just seems like it's not going to happen in time for the Donald to get credit for it, right? That's just going to take many more years than just the 4 that he's got here. So it does seem like it can't be, he's not going to get political kudos for this. I don't think all the benefits will be further down the line. So I don't know. What do you think, Brian, is really happening here? Is this a good faith attempt to actually fix the problems of besetting the middle class? Or is this another example of Lucy moving the football on Charlie Brown, the middle and lower classes, every time we keep voting for people who promise to help out the lower middle classes, and they keep not doing that at all, and instead continuing the consolidation of wealth at the top and blowing out the wealth inequality that besets this country. So, or the third option here is that Donald's just a moron and has no idea what he's doing, which is what the narrative you get on Reddit, which I don't think that's believable either. I think the most believable is that it's another Charlie Brown with a football moment. But what do you think, Brian? What's your first blush thoughts here?
All right. Well, I think I don't buy this idea. It seems like the mainstream media anyway is like, well, the stock market's in the shitter, and this is a disaster. Yes. Trump is incompetent. These tariffs are awful. I'm not buying that. Like, the stock market going down, I don't think is bad for any like normal person for the most part. I mean, this is bad for people's 401ks. And so if you're like trying to retire, well, this is unfortunate. It's a bad time to be trying to retire. But I guess I just have a couple opinions. So, like, well, one thing is that Trump is calling these reciprocal tariffs, right? But so reciprocal tariffs would suggest that, you know, if China is taxing our imports at 30%, that we are now going to tax their imports at 30%. But that's not really the way these tariffs work. Reciprocal is really like a misnomer because it's based on our trade deficits with these countries. So, and Dave Smith was making this point on his podcast from this morning, talking about these tariffs, that if China was making their goods and giving them away for free, would that be a bad thing, I guess?
So I see what you're saying. So yes, there's a monster trade imbalance. All of our dollars are flowing into China, and what's flowing into the United States is cheap goods from the Chinese mainland. And so you're saying we don't want to discount the arrival of all those cheap goods is also a benefit that you have to factor into this trade imbalance. If you don't factor that in, of course, it's going to look like all of this money is going to China and, you know, nothing's coming back. But really, we are getting all kinds of products from overseas. And so that's what you're saying here?
Right. So I guess my feeling is that what would be good, like what makes sense is reciprocal tariffs, because if they're just tariffing our exports, that's bad and we don't tariff their imports. Like, that's bad for American industry, because we should be able to make goods and sell them to other countries rather than just getting American industry destroyed with cheap imports, yes, right? Yeah. While they tariff us. So to me, it seems wrong that having tariffs that are based on trade deficits rather than the actual tariffs does seem incorrect. But what I just did some chat GPT research on the matter. And so I guess China tariffs us at 34%, and we were tariffing them at 20%. And so now the new tariff rate is 54%. And so maybe it would be better if it was like 34%. But basically, every other country tariffs us a lot more than we tariff them. Yeah. And so that part doesn't seem right. And so now it's gone like way in the other direction. And so I'm optimistic that this is going to be the high water mark for tariffs, and that this is like kind of the initial offer, which is kind of like, it's the art of the deal strategy, is to come in with something much higher, right, and then like negotiate down from there. Yeah. So I don't know, like I'm not going to like freak out about I freak out when the price of groceries starts like going up, or like the economy like hit the shitter back in like 2011. And the biggest impacts I got out of college, and it was like no longer possible to get a job. Yeah. So I ended up, working in a call center.
Yeah. This is the aftermath of the 2008 financial collapse, of course.
Right. So, I mean, if there's like far-reaching impacts and it suddenly becomes impossible to get a job or whatever, well then, let's say it was a disaster and Trump is a moron. But man, I just don't think, like, the stock market going down, I mean, what you should do is, this is the time to like be buying stocks, and this is like an opportunity. And the idea that the stock market's gone down, and so like working class people should freak out, I don't think it makes any sense at all. That seems like That just seems completely backwards. Like, we should be excited that the rich have to suffer right now.
Yes, I agree that the stock market is a very poor indicator for the overall health of the economy. So I definitely agree. And furthermore, even with just looking at the Dow and the S&P graphs yesterday, we're back. Yes, there's been splashy losses this week on both indices, but we're just back to April 2024 levels now. We just gone back less than a year in terms of the levels the major stock indexes are currently at. So I do think it's easy to see those big numbers and freak out, but it's really, you got to keep it in perspective. We may see more tumbles in the stock market this upcoming week, but as of this weekend, we're only back to April of 24 levels. And man, there is part of the when there's a trade deficit, that used to be a major problem when we used to have the gold standard or the gold exchange standard. That's one thing to keep in mind here, right? You can't have no matter how many wonderful goods arrive at your ports, no matter how many wonderful imports arrive at your ports of call, you got an issue if all your currency is going overseas, because that currency is supposed to be backed by gold, right? So your gold reserves would be dwindling if you had too much of a trade imbalance. And up until historically, before when we had the gold standard, countries would have to jack up their interest rates. If too much gold was leaving their country, they would have to jack up their own interest rates and devastate their own economy to equalize to make it so that there's less of a market for imports domestically, right? So that they import less, so that the trade balance is maintained. So it could be that the Donald is just stuck in the pre-1971 paradigm where these trade deficits really are. When you have a gold standard, now you got a problem. We have fiat currency now, so we don't have that problem. We can just print more. No matter how many dollars end up in China, we can just print more, right? So I'm wondering if maybe the Donald is just not realizing he's in a fiat currency paradigm here. Maybe that's the case. This would be the Donald's incompetent scenario. So that's one interesting piece. Like the balance of trade used to be really important when we had currency that was convertible to precious metals, obviously. And so there also is if you think of Uncle Sam and the domestic economy as two buckets, right? Where if Uncle Sam, the amount of money in Uncle Sam's bucket and the amount of money that's in the public coffers equals zero, right? Because our government issues the currency. So if you start a new government and you give out $100, you can't tax any dollars back. You first have to spend some dollars into the economy before you can tax back dollar number one. That's something that almost no one seems to understand. But really, think about it, right? The U.S. government cannot tax a U.S. dollar off of anyone. They first have to seed the economy with these dollars for there's one to take back. And the delta between what the government spends into the economy and then what it taxes back out is the amount of money left in the private sector to circulate amongst for the rest of us to use. In other words, the government deficit is equal to private sector savings. And if you introduce this is all from Dr. Stephanie Kelton. She's the modern monetary theory woman from the University of Kansas City. So this is all in her book, The Deficit Myth. But if you add a third bucket that's you have Uncle Sam, then you have the domestic economy, and then you have foreign economies as a third bucket, just understand that all three of those buckets still equal zero. So the money that's circulating in foreign countries and the money that's circulating here combined equals the federal deficit, the amount of money they've issued but not taxed back.
I guess what I don't understand about that, and I know we talked about it a few times on the podcast, but if the government prints money, that lowers the value of the money that's we already have, although obviously that money did have to be seeded in the first place. So that part I understand. But if the government prints more money, I mean, isn't that really a tax anyway?
It could, yes. If the government prints too much money, they will cause an inflation. Absolutely, that is inescapable. But the point I always bring up at this juncture is that we already have a method we have a method to add money to, for Uncle Sam to take money out of the economy with taxes and can spend money back into the economy. All right, we don't need to borrow money from the rich. That's another way to raise revenue that's not taxes, and the rich prefer it because they would much rather loan Uncle Sam their dollars at interest instead of being taxed and never seeing that money again. Right? If you buy treasury bonds rich people would much rather buy U.S. government treasury bonds, right? They'd rather buy U.S. debt than be taxed and never see that money again, obviously. So that's a big part of the problem here. And a lot of our currency creation does come from the people that really we've given a monopoly on currency creation to the banks, right? The Federal Reserve is the one that creates our dollars and not the feds anymore. But the fact still remains that it is a fiat currency and we can print it out of thin air at will, whether it's whether it's by spending money into the economy or having banks loan us the money into existence. Sorry, you said you didn't understand something, and now I forget what I'm supposed to be answering here.
Well, so printing money, too much money is a tax.
Yes.
So we agree on that.
Yes. Yeah. If you print too much money, you will get an inflation. But there's other factors that like if you print money, and the rate of there's other ways you can get an inflation too. Right. Obviously, there's supply and demand, right, and then there's corporate greed. Right. Supply and demand. If suddenly there's half as many goods, then the price of those goods will go up just because of supply and demand, right? If you have the same amount of buyers but half as many goods, well, you're going to see prices go up. You're getting inflation that way. And then the other one is that, managers love to put up their prices without doing anything, right? The best way to make money is just to charge more for the goods that you sell, and then that's it, right? Versus having to innovate new products or, build new factories or whatever. You can just charge more for your existing products and make money that way. And everyone always wants to charge as much as they can. So that's another way you can get an inflation. If corporations just think they can get away with it, they will. Yes, spending too much money will definitely cause an inflation. You're right about that. But how does that really impact the trade war, do you think? Like, how did we get to this to this part of the discussion? I was talking about MMT and the many buckets, and how I was driving at this point where you can just see with the 3-bucket experiment that the more money flows out of our country to China or to other countries because we have a trade imbalance, the more the federal debt's going to have to go up, because that money is coming out of the domestic economy, and we still need money in the domestic economy. So we're going to have to create money to replace the cash that's flowing overseas to China, so that there can still be enough money in the domestic economy. So you will see, when you have a big trade imbalance, you'll see a big blow up, and that obviously contributes to the national debt, which is something that Donald considers to be a huge problem. So maybe that's what he's thinking. I'm not sure. I don't know. They're not selling it that way. They're selling it as this is going to be great for the middle and lower classes who, well, they've been inundated with cheap goods, have all lost their jobs, and have just suffered economic catastrophe after economic catastrophe for 50 years now. Which is why the Democrats are wildly unpopular. They don't do anything to stop the bleeding of money from the lower and middle classes to the upper classes.
Yeah, well, there's the thing where like Henry Ford wanted to pay his employees more so they could buy more Fords, and then I guess I was hearing this on Tim Pool, but I guess like Dodge sued Henry Ford, or there was this thing where they made the companies responsible to the shareholders rather than the employees. Which, broadly speaking, does sound like the problem, right?
Yeah, yes.
And so having accountable to the employees, well, it goes back to companies having to offer to sell their company to the employees first. Like, there is no responsibility to the employees. It is to the shareholders. And so that dynamic does seem like a part of the issue.
Well, that's you really hit on the heart of the matter here, because the reason that the reason the middle and lower classes were destroyed, like free trade should be an amazing thing, right? Free trade is what we want. You were talking about Dave Smith's treatment of this subject, and he made the point. Obviously, the free trade would be ideal. Like, a good parallel here is labor-saving technology. Like, you would think the advent of labor-saving technology should be a godsend for everyone. That should be a universally good thing. We should be delighted whenever a power loom or a spinning jenny automates the textile industry, right? But because those companies are controlled by a tiny minority of shareholders and are not democratically accountable in any way to the people that work there, all of our manufacturing just moved overseas, where the people that own the business can pay slave wages and jack up the profitability of those companies. Now, obviously, your Ford worker on the line in Dearborn, Michigan, is never going to vote to outsource her own job to China, right? That would be, if it was democratically controlled, that would never in a million years happen. The reason that all of our strategic industries have vanished overseas, in other words, is because of a flaw in the structure of capitalism, the ownership structure of these corporations. And the Donald is trying to fix that problem without doing anything to address the problems of capitalism in general, right? And the fundamental problem here is that all of the wealth that used to be contained with the middle and lower classes is being reclaimed by the wealthy systematically. And you can offshoring factories is a big factor in that. And it's a big reason why wage growth stagnated in the 70s, even though employee productivity kept shooting up, just like it has for all of history, as better machines are built and they act as processes and make each individual worker much more productive than they otherwise would have been. So, like when in other words, when Ford fires all of its workers and moves their vehicle production to China or wherever, Canada or Mexico, that is fundamental. That causes a massive transfer of wealth from the people that the Ford used to have to pay living wages to. They can now pay slave wages and pocket all that extra profit for themselves. So it's functionally a massive transfer of wealth from middle and lower class folks to the folks that own corporations right now. So capitalism fundamentally blows up wealth inequalities. This was Marx's observation in the 19th century, and we're still trying to figure it out to this day.
Well, the captain was supposed to be on the podcast this week, yes, but something came up. But I would be, he's like an actual small business owner, and I would be interested to hear what his opinion is on these tariffs. Probably not good, would be my guess. But his perspective as an actual person that actually is existing in the economy would be valuable. We'll have to get the captain back on here. He made his apologies and said he would be back on soon enough. So we'll have to quiz him on these when next we see his smiling face, eh? Well, as a grunt employee for like a large insurance company, my feeling right now is I'm selling on the hype that these tariffs are a disaster, and it seems like an art of the deal style method to like normalize trade relations with other countries. And I just don't buy this idea that because the stock market is down, I need to freak out.
Yeah. Yes.
But I think we'll probably be more critical of the Donald in the second half of the podcast here.
I'm sure we will be. Let's see. I think that pretty much gets us to the end of this first section here. Brian, shall we take a little break and come back with Mr. Dave Smith and his recent appearance on the JRE?
All right.
All right. We'll be right back, folks, after this short break. And we're back. Well, alrighty, Brian. Last week we had a chance to drive down to Boston and see our main man, comedian Dave Smith, in person. Huh? That was a pretty good trip.
I thought so. I did kind of think that it was when we saw Robbie the Fire Bernstein, his sidekick, at the Libertarian headquarters somewhere in New Hampshire there. I thought that was probably overall more knee-slapping hilarity.
Yeah, yes.
But it was still a pretty good show, though.
Yeah, it was much more of a comedy club than the Libertarian, hangout, the Libertarian treehouse, or wherever out in the woods of New Hampshire where we saw Robbie the Fire last fall, something like that?
Yeah. Well, Robbie had that joke about how you can't trust a fart anymore because the food supply is terrible. And nothing was quite that funny to me, but it was still pretty good. I mean, he was talking about how Trump, I don't know, he sounds like he's retarded, but he learned the word tremendous, so he just likes to say tremendous over and over.
Yeah. Some pretty good jokes at the Donald's expense. They were pretty funny. My big takeaway was clearly Smith was blasted when he strolled onto stage. Right? That dude, he had like the weed. He clearly been smoking weed for hours. Like I know that vibe. Because if I've smoked weed for hours, I can recognize it, And I was like, wow, I can't imagine if I had ever smoked pot to then go out on stage. That would be, it would be so uncomfortable. But Dave Smith wasn't uncomfortable. His affect was a little bit quiet. It wasn't the normal force behind his delivery. But he still had really funny jokes, So,
well, he seemed like he had to be very deliberate in light of how high he was.
Yeah,
was my impression.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, but it was a pretty good performance. And so naturally, when we were thinking about what would be the podcast of the week this week, it's going to have to be Dave Smith's performance on the JRE. He must have flown from Boston straight out to Austin to record his JRE. So it was interesting to hear the man on the JRE when we had just seen him a few days prior down there in Beantown. So that was pretty good. And so obviously, Dave Smith's appearance on the JRE did not touch the tariff topic. They instead talked about war and the history between Israel and the United States and the prospects of going to war in Iran, which is some saber rattling that the Donald has been up to lately. At a certain point in this podcast, Smith, I didn't clip this because it was too short, but Smith just said that he would apologize for voting for the Donald or for supporting the Donald if, in fact, we do end up going to war with Iran, which, of course, would be a terrible disaster. Obviously, we can't.
Well, I have a theory about the saber rattling with Iran, but I don't know. Maybe we should get through these clips here.
Yeah. All right. Don't forget your theory. Let's hit the clips, and then you can regale us with said theory. Yeah? All right, so if we could get started with clip number one. Brian, this one is about General Wesley Clark.
Okay, so Piers Morgan hosts a debate between Scott Horton and Wesley Clark.
Oh, interesting.
And so in this debate, one of the most interesting things, Wesley Clark just very casually said this, but it's like breaking news. But he said, so everybody, I assume we played it like a bunch of times on the show before, but Wesley Clark's 4-star general, he was the head of NATO, and he told Amy Goodman on Democracy Now! That he saw in late 2001 what is become known as the 7 wars in 5 years, that the plan from the neocons in the government was that we were going to overthrow all these governments in the region in the next 5 years. Now, this plan obviously didn't end up happening in 5 years, but it's literally he names 7 countries and there's one to go. And that one, by the way, happens to be the one that Donald Trump is flirting with a war with right now, Iran. All the rest of them have happened.
Israeli news reported today that a strike on Iran is imminent.
Yeah.
Did you see that?
Yeah. No, we're very clearly moving toward this war, yet another catastrophic war. But so Wesley Clark gets asked about this in the debate, and he goes, "Oh, it actually goes back much further than that." He goes, "I first saw the plans in 1991, and it came from Paul Wolfowitz." Okay, so he goes, Paul Wolfowitz had these plans in 1991, and he took them to Brent Scowcroft, who was George H.W. Bush's national security advisor. So he takes them to them, and according to Wesley Clark, again, my source on this is a 4-star general. He says that Scowcroft went, "We'll look at this after the election." 92 is the election year. They lose. Bill Clinton comes in, and he goes, and the plan kind of got killed. And then he said it was revived later in a study paid for by the Israelis. And that this was done, that Richard Pearl was really the one who brought it back to life, and that it was explicitly done because this is what they thought was necessary to protect Israel. And like, as I've mentioned to you before, now I don't know exactly what study he's referring to, but he said that's what he said. But I do know, as I've mentioned before on this, that anybody can go read The Clean Break. You could Google it right now. It's a clean break, a new strategy for securing the realm, which was a letter written by the guy he mentioned, Richard Pearl and David Wormser, to Benjamin Netanyahu in 1996. It was his first year when he came in as prime minister. And the whole thing is basically the clean break is a break from the peace process, a break from Oslo, because essentially Bill Clinton had gotten Yitzhak Rabin and Arafat to agree to like start this 2-state solution process that should be loosely based around 67 borders. You got to finally give these Palestinians a state. You've been occupying them since 1967. You got to finally take your boot off their neck. And the clean break strategy was to go, listen, we got to get away from this whole idea of a Palestinian state and giving them land. And basically the thinking, the Yitzhak Rabin old school thinking on this, loosely speaking, it's a little more complicated, but basically they were like, look, we've been occupying the Palestinians for decades and decades now. The broader Arab world hates us over our treatment of the Palestinians. And so what you got to do is you have to make peace with the Palestinians so that you can get along with all these Arab states around you. That was kind of the thinking. And the clean break strategy was like, no. We're going to reverse that. Instead of making peace with the Palestinians so that we get along with the Arab states surrounding us, what we're going to do is we're going to overthrow all of those states. So we never have to make peace with the Palestinians. So we never have to have a 2-state solution. What we'll just do is we'll go overthrow all of these governments. Of course, Israel can't go overthrow all of these governments, but the U.S. can. And so after they had these plans in according to Wesley Clark in 91. We know about the clean break memo in 96. But after 9/11, that's when, by a terrible twist of fate and all this shit, the neocons are in power. They're in George W. Bush's, but there is no Brent Scowcroft. There is no H.W. There's nobody with like a little bit of wisdom at the top. It's Dick Cheney at the top, and then his sidekick, George W. Bush.
Yeah, so you can see how, if Wesley Clark's repeated allusions to this are to be believed at all, you can really see how there's a strange intertwining of American and Israeli foreign policy. The quintessential example here is most folks don't realize how instrumental Israelis were in getting us into that war in Iraq. So just to illustrate that point, we're going to step away from Dave Smith for a second, and I just have a 30-second clip. These are actually 2 clips spliced together, but this is Benjamin Netanyahu's expert testimony to Congress in 2002, testifying before, like I say, our Congress, and telling us just how much of a great idea it is for us to go to war with Iraq. And notice he weaves Iran in here too a little bit. So go ahead and hit that Netanyahu clip for me, Brian.
The question you have is this. The question you have is this. This is now a question of not of values. Obviously, we like to see a regime change, at least I would, in Iran, just as I would like to see in Iraq. The question now is a practical question. What is the best place to proceed? It's not a question of whether Iraq's regime should be taken out, but when should it be taken out? It's not a question of whether you'd like to see a regime change in Iran, but how to achieve it. If you take out Saddam's regime, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region.
Yeesh. Yeah, so there you have it, old Bibi Netanyahu.
Yeah, like, what is his idea of positive reverberations?
I just think that's a lie. I think it serves the Israelis to have Saddam Hussein removed from power.
Well, I think his idea of positive reverberations is like more war in the Middle East.
Yeah, he wants to have the U.S. come and take out all of the governments that are hostile to his government, and we went along with it, just like we always seem to go along with it. So we got another clip from Mr. Smith here, Brian. We got two more clips from Mr. Smith. Let's let him expound here upon the tragedy of Donald Trump, and then we'll get to our discussion after the second clip.
But there is this like kind of tragedy with Donald Trump too, where it's like he's the one guy who was able to do all of this. And I will say there were hopes that it was like, hey, he maybe this time around. Oh man, he's got Bobby Kennedy there. He's got Tulsi Gabbard there. He's got like all right. This is like a whole different thing.
I'm going to stop that war in one day.
Yes, right. He's here to end the wars. Also, like he had been burned by the system now. Yeah. In a whole. It's not just that they called him a Russian traitor or whatever. It's like they tried to throw him in jail. They tried to murder him. Okay, this is maybe. Did. Oh no, yeah, no. I'm sorry.
Somebody
that was totally happened.
He had 5 phones.
Dude, a lot of times, as we all know,
professionally scrubbed department.
Yes, that happens all the time, Joe. Many times, presidential candidates, the front runner to be president, once again, former presidents, a sniper gets a clean shot 130 yards away from them. That's especially a very common thing.
A guy who was in a BlackRock commercial just a couple of years ago.
And a lot of those guys were in BlackRock commercials once, Joe. These are normal things that happen to normal people. It's part of everyday politics. But so a lot of this made people think like, oh, maybe. But I will say, already into Trump's presidency, it's just a lot it's like, shit. No, I guess I got to be happy with the things that he did. But the idea that he's really figured this out, or he's really on to something, or he's learned a lot, or the guy is out there, he's saying we should primary Thomas Massie and throwing his support behind Lindsey Graham. I mean, come on.
What is Thomas Massie doing that's pissing him off?
No, he didn't vote for the freaking spending bill. He voted against the CR because it increased spending and was increasing the debt, and it was refunding all of the programs that Doge had recommended be cut. So he was like, no, I'm not voting for this. And Trump was like, well, I'm going to need you to vote for it. And he was like, no.
Oh.
And that's it. That's his crime. The same thing, same reason Trump hated him in 2020, because he wouldn't vote for the $2 trillion COVID spending bill. Because he was like, wait, you're telling me because the country's locked down, that means we have to bail out every giant corporation around the country? Like, no, I'm not supporting this. And then Trump sent all his people to go, he's betraying America first or whatever. And there's once Trump gets in it, he just wants the next win. But, the real problem here is like, the idea that we are going to go and ethnically cleanse, like finish the job of ethnically cleansing the Palestinians out of Gaza on behalf of Israel. It's like, first of all, what do you think the reaction to that's going to be? What do you think that's going to do to our country?
Okay, so man, so at the first half of the pod, we were talking about these tariffs and we were handicapping the odds and whether or not this will actually benefit the lower middle class. How bad is this really? Is the Donald a buffoon? Is the Donald pulling one over us on us like Lucy pulling the football away from Charlie Brown? And so this business of foreign policy really seems to suggest that the Donald is incompetent, or that like he's just he's making all the same moves, making the same acquiescence to Israel, and acquiescence to Israel has meant a lot of wars for this country, a lot of disastrous wars for this country in the past. Well, it's disheartening to see the Donald go down that path. Is there any chance that he could be that he could have America's best interest at heart on the tariff side, even if he ignores America's best interest on the foreign policy side? What do you think, Brian?
Well, I'm curious as to what the last clip is before I before I opine fully.
All right. Well, I wanted to, before I play the last clip, just build this out a little bit. I think what's happening. You remember that there was the response to COVID was obviously coordinated across international governments. So like nominal heads of state obviously were coordinating with each other to bring us the COVID response that they brought us. Right. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. Like they would obviously, various heads of state were working in concert with each other, so that there was so they could project some solidarity or whatever during the COVID debacle.
Well, it seemed to be like planned through like Bilderberg, and
Yes.
let's see, what was that? It was like Project 201 or something. They met up and decided what was going to happen before it happened.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So I think most folks realize that Elon Musk is not the wealthiest person in the world. He's just the wealthiest person who gets published, right? There's all kinds of shadowy international banking houses that have all this money, like the Rothschilds, that aren't really talked about or acknowledged directly in the mainstream media. They just say Elon Musk, richest man in the world, without acknowledging some of these.
Yeah, richest man on paper.
Yes, yeah. And well, we've talked about it many times here, but it used to be that the Pope was the man who pulled the strings on the international stage, right? At least in Western Europe, right? The Pope was the man who crowned the nominal heads of Christendom, right? And we've talked about Charlemagne getting the crown put on his head by Pope Leo X and not Leo X, Leo III, by the Pope during Christmas Day of 800, right? And so from that point forward, the power wanes, it waxes and wanes, but for the most part, the Pope was the man who got to decide, who got to sanction the ruling families who would rule by divine right in the various kingdoms around Western Europe, right? But then the Protestant Reformation happened, and the Pope got demoted from that role. The consensus reached in the Treaty of Westphalen in 1649 was we're going to have international borders from here on out. And we can't have the agents of the Pope crossing those borders and trying to force countries that wish to be Protestant to be Catholic instead. So we're going to have to give each state its own right to determine whether it wants to be Catholic or Protestant. And that's kind of how the Protestant Reformation shook out in the end. You have some Catholic states and you have some Protestant states. But less than 50 years later, right, you have the first, the Bank of England. They weren't the first central bank, but they're the first central bank that still exists today. I think the Swedes had one before. They'd innovated this concept in Sweden, but that bank doesn't exist anymore. The Bank of England is the oldest one that still exists. And that thing came around in 1692, less than 50 years after the Treaty of Westphalen. So the contention here is that it is the international bankers who seat the nominal heads of state. Look no further than the Citigroup email that WikiLeaks leaked, wherein Citigroup was approving Obama's cabinet, right? Citigroup gets to pick who sits in Obama's cabinet and who's left out, because Obama is beholden to Citigroup because they're connected to this shadowy world of international finance. So there's another piece of this puzzle too, and that's that the banks, oftentimes when you have finance without debt forgiveness attached to it, as innovated by the Romans, you have a problem with banks. And whenever there's an economic downturn or whenever there's economic activity, for whatever reason, maybe there's a war, a famine, or a flood, what have you, when economic activity collapses, the banks end up collecting everyone's property, right? Because they will foreclose on everyone who took out loans thinking they were going to be able to pay them back with their farm or whatever. Now suddenly can't pay their loans back, and if you don't have forgiveness, what you have instead is foreclosure. And so the banks would often end up with they would often end up absconding with the wealth of the communities that they were ensconced in. There's a suspicion of bankers that goes. You can still talk to some of the old timers who lived through the Depression. You ever hear stories of old ladies or old men who are suspicious of the banks and hide all of their money in their mattress or in jars around their house because they don't want to put their money in them. They remember the bank runs of the Depression era from when they were kids. It's a Wonderful Life with Jimmy Stewart. That movie is one of the most famous treatment of bank runs in Hollywood. They remember that you would put your money in the bank and then you might not be able to get it back out. Anyway, the point is that when you have finance but not forgiveness, that makes the banks predatory. It makes them able to abscond with all the wealth of the communities that they belong to, and this is what has engendered a very long tradition of being suspicious of banks. The story of Jesus throwing the moneylenders out of the Temple of Solomon is in the New Testament, in the Gospel of John. It's in all four Gospels. And it's like that theme of being suspicious of the money changers is like age old. Now, there's an unfortunate anti-Semitism piece to this, and Dave Smith's last clip will be about anti-Semitism and the knock-on effects of us carrying out Israelis' foreign policy for them. But the point I would make here is that, so during the Middle Ages, oftentimes Jewish folks were banned from owning property because of anti-Semitism, and so they kind of had to turn to professions like being a lawyer or being a money changer or a financier or a bank, because there weren't any other options open to them at the time. They were treated very poorly in medieval. There are stories about King John, the same man who put his signature on the Magna Carta. Like he would borrow money from the Jewish community in Britain, and then he would like torture them to get them to forgive the debts to him, or he would accuse them of some horrible anti-Semitic thing and put them in jail and like confiscate their wealth and cancel the debts he owed to them. Now, it's not even that the majority of moneylenders during the Middle Ages were Jewish. It's just that some were. And so you get like the Merchant of Venice, Shakespeare's play, which is all about Shylock the Jew, who's a moneylender, and he loans money to Antonio, and the default conditions are that Antonio has to surrender a pound of his own flesh if he doesn't pay back the loan, and he can't pay back the loan. And so the whole story is about how, Shylock the Jew gets ripped off. It's hilarious. He doesn't get to collect his pound of flesh, So this anti-Semitism bit, like, it's really unfortunate that this gets mixed in with finance, but some of that suspicion that should be going to the banks ends up on Jewish people instead, just because people the banks are always trying to cover their tracks, right? This is why the international banking houses rule in secret. They have mystery schools, and they don't publicly advertise, because they're aware that public sentiment can turn on the banks like that. And so they're not ostentatious like the Pope marching around, and the Pope would wear the regalia of the Roman Emperor and march around in like the purple robes. And the banking houses are much more subtle because they realize this tendency for people to realize that the banks are ripping us all off. So the point here is like I just wanted to play Dave Smith's piece on anti-Semitism because we really want to criticize international finance. I think that these shadowy banking houses that run that place the heads of state, like Obama in that Citibank email, the place that have the power of the heads of state, these are the guys that want us to carry out Israeli foreign policy. So I do think that international banking houses have influence they control both Israeli politics and U.S. politics. And so we want to just avoid, like, there's nothing wrong with Israeli people, nothing wrong with Jewish people. It's like the war-hungry Likud party specifically, and finance specifically, that we want to talk about here. So Dave Smith in this last clip is going to lament the anti-Semitism that arises from America blindly following Israeli's foreign policy. Like the man himself is a Jew, and he's like, it's unfortunate that people are imprecise and they become suspicious of Jews in general instead of this one specific party in Israel or the shadowy international banking houses. So cue up the last clip, Brian.
It's like I see a lot of people who get very upset about what they call the rise of anti-Semitism, which certainly, according to my Twitter feed, is real.
It's real.
There's a lot of people.
Do you think is it a rise, or is it the ability to express it now been unlocked? Or is it both?
I don't know. Maybe both. I have a tough time kind of figuring out exactly what it is. It's also there's a troll aspect to it. There's when you make one thing the thing that you're not allowed to say, and the thing that's gonna get a rise out of everybody. This has been true, and it's been building for many years. Kind of the alt-right back in the day was kind of the first version of this, but where you could be some guy just on your computer. You could be a 15-year-old on your phone or whatever, and you could get the New York Times senior editor to be like, oh, look at this outrage, and just the ability to provoke that reaction out of somebody that's fun.
Shitposting.
Yes, that's fun. And you're handing this person who has no power, like some real kind of power.
Right.
I also think that for young men today, particularly like young, straight, white men, I think it's kind of hard, like for me and you, to even understand the world they grew up in. It's very different than the world we grew up. Like, they grew up in this woke era. And okay, now it's kind of like that's receded and wokeism has been defeated. But they grew up in a time where racialism was accepted by every powerful institution, just against them.
Right.
You know, like, it was totally fine to demonize straight white men at your high school, at your college, in your movies, in your TV shows, your politicians, celebrities, everybody was just, and that does, like, it unlocks a certain thing that we kind of all had a gentleman's agreement to not unlock. Like, we're just not really going to do that. You know, we don't want to be like racialists. And so I think that's a component to it too. But there's also no question that it's exploded since Israel's launched this war on Gaza.
Well, there you have it. I agree with everything Mr. Smith said there, but I think he's missing a huge, important Lincoln log in the log cabin of anti-Semitism, and that is the nefarious influence of finance. A couple of points here I already brought up a couple times now. Obama's famous emails with Citibank approving his cabinet, but there's a few more pieces of history that folks don't realize. Like specifically, we all know about the Rothschild banking house, right, Brian? Famously, Lord Rothschild found out about Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo before everyone else in London, and spread a rumor that the Duke of York there had been defeated, and that Napoleon had won. And so when the stocks crashed in the London FTSE, he bought up huge amounts of the British economy for pennies on the pound. And that's a famous story about the Rothschilds, who are this banking network. They started in Germany, but eventually Rothschild's bankers ended up setting up their banks in every country in Europe. And another thing that folks don't realize how integral, the Rothschilds obviously were a Jewish banking family, and folks don't realize how integral they were to setting up the state of Israel in the first place. And famously, the Balfour Declaration of 1917, and during the First World War, as it became obvious that the Allies were going to win World War I, Lord Balfour, who was the Prime Minister of England, wrote a letter expressing British interest in a Jewish state in Israel. So this is before World War II, right? Before Hitler and the Germans, this famous Balfour Declaration. That Balfour Declaration was a letter addressed to none other than Lord Rothschild. Right? It was the Rothschilds who chose the Star of David for the Israeli flag. Now, the Star of David is a hexagram. It's an ancient symbol of magic that belongs to these mystery schools that the banking houses emulated during the 17th century when they set up shop to keep themselves secret. Right? They emulated the old mystery schools of Greece and Rome, and they emulated the Knights Templar and the Freemasons, who themselves emulated the Knights Templar. So they set up their banking houses as secret societies, in other words, like the Bavarian Illuminati. And international finance had a lot to do with that. To my mind, the fact that the Rothschilds happen to be Jewish is purely incidental to this story, but it does explain why people, when they become suspicious of banks, they imprecisely also, they're just these bizarre strains of anti-Semitism from the Middle Ages still lurking around. And so that, I think that causes people to take their eye off the bank and to focus on Jewish people instead, which seems totally misguided from where I'm sitting. It is the nature of compound interest in finance, untethered by debt forgiveness, that is the threat, I think, here, that they're trying to pretend is not a threat. And so, I just wanted to, I think that is why our foreign policy is so obviously, seems to be happening at Israel's behest. We do what the Israelis need done. We seem to do it no matter who we elect to office. You can elect the America First, the Donald, and he's still going to just do whatever the Israelis need done. It's depressing, and it does mean more. If we actually invade Iran, it'll be because that's good for the Israelis, not because it's good for us. And that would be an unmitigated disaster, as Mr. Smith pointed out on the Joe Rogan Experience yesterday.
All right. Well, so I have a theory.
Hit me.
And so just, like with immigration, the Donald Trump got elected, I guess, with a mandate for, mass deportation of illegals. Yeah. And it seems like it's sort of becoming deporting people with green cards who, criticized Israel on campuses.
Yeah, the chick from Colombia. Yeah.
Yeah. Did they send her off to El Salvador or?
I don't know. I can't remember what her story was, but yeah, outrageous.
Yeah, so like, what explains this crazy behavior? And then there's also, like Tulsi Gabbard has been like not a warmonger for her whole career, and now she's in office, and I mean, she's cheering on these bomb strikes in like Yemen or whatever, blowing up apartment buildings because this dude went in there with his girlfriend or whatever. And so I think what it really comes down to is the petrodollar. And of course, the petrodollar is this idea that like the American dollar is based on the idea that, the United States will go to war with any country that tries to buy oil in not U.S. denominations, right? And so this is what gives the Federal Reserve the ability to print money that, to the extent that it can, because oil is the backbone of the whole world's economy, basically, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And so I think there's just this thing where like China has been like doing these infrastructure projects, around the world, like trying to like grow its influence and whatnot. And so that is like a threat to the petrodollar and the influence of the United States. And so like who stands to lose the most if the petrodollar goes away? And I think basically my theory would be that like Israel is like a manifestation of the petrodollar, right? And so if the petrodollar goes, it's kind of, well, there's just no way we're going to be like propping up this regime in the Middle East, right?
Can we double click on that? Like, why would you say Israel is a manifestation of the petrodollar? I think I can see it, but I just want you to expound on that point a little more.
Well, we need this ally in the Middle East to let us, to attack all these oil countries from, right? It's just such a geopolitical, strategic, point that's essential to carrying out the dominance of like American foreign policy in the Middle East, right?
I see what you're saying. So Israel acts as a forward operating base from which we can strike all these oil producing countries.
Yeah, and so like I don't know, Saddam Hussein was like. Well, I mean, what it's understood in conspiracy circles anyway is that he was threatening the petrodollar. The same is true for Gaddafi, and so all these countries that are on the list, like in Iran, these are like threats to the petrodollar. And so, like if the petrodollar goes away, I mean, it'll be good. I think that the United States will not be like the world police, and we won't have to be this this military like empire. But it's also just going to be like a drastic change of the status quo, right? And so I got to think that like all these interests, like it converges in like the manifestation of like this Israeli state, right? So I just have to imagine that like Donald Trump is kind of like up against the petrodollar. I think it explains like why they don't have a choice. Like this petrodollar is just so deeply ingrained into our society, right?
Well,
I mean,
Go ahead.
I mean, are people like prepared to pay like $8 a gallon for gasoline if the petrodollar goes away? Well, I mean, I guess through fracking and whatnot, we have a lot more oil here, so probably getting past this petrodollar, I think probably would be a net benefit to us all, and we can probably become a peaceful empire once that happens. But man, I just think we are deeply ingrained in this petrodollar, and it's just this bizarre like immigration stuff. I mean, I think that's what you're seeing here, right?
Yes, this goes back to the import-export thing we talked about at the top of the pod. It's because oil must be exchanged, because you have to first change whatever currency you have into U.S. dollars and then buy oil with it. That gins up demand for U.S. Treasury bonds, right? So our ability to print money is directly related to this petrodollar, right? We can only... We can't. Everyone wants U.S. dollars because they need those dollars to buy oil, and so that creates virtually unlimited demand for our treasury bonds denominated in U.S. dollars. And boy, so that would really drastically change our country if we if we didn't have suddenly unlimited demand for our treasuries. The number of treasuries that the government could print would be a lot fewer because there'd maybe collapsed demand for the U.S. dollar and increased demand in whatever currencies oil is available in. So that would be, if we lost that would drastically change the way that our federal budget works. I think that we essentially get all these countries to pay for their own military encirclement with this petrodollar because they have to use U.S. dollars. They haven't really got a choice. And like you pointed out, Brian, anyone that dares, like Muammar Gaddafi with his pan-African currency. Anyone that dares to suggest that oil ought to be traded in some currency other than U.S. dollars gets the full might of the U.S. military brought down their head. So yeah, I agree. The petrodollar. I guess I hadn't made the connection between the petrodollar and Israeli foreign policy, but it's a good connection to make. I think that's pretty good, pretty astute.
Yeah, and so I don't know if this lowers my opinion of Donald Trump. I don't quite know how to land on it, but I just don't know like what anyone who gets elected. I don't think you can get elected and kind of try to be like disrupting the petrodollar. It seems extremely unlikely. But I think America's influence is waning. And so this tariff business does seem kind of at odds. Because like the raising of tariffs, I mean, this is going to like lower our influence around the world, right? And make us more of a private country. And we're not going to be like buying everyone's exports.
Yeah,
so
well,
much anymore.
We'll be shipping them less funny money, and they'll be shipping us less imports. So we are. It does seem like we're giving up our petrodollar advantage by in an effort to try to build back out the middle and lower classes.
Yeah, so I don't know. Just the way the administration is acting, though, it sure seems like the plan is to, I don't know, carry forth with war with Iran. Like it doesn't seem like it's like we need to have a proxy war with China through Iran, or like through maybe Russia and China, or like the rest of the world versus the American empire. It's going to like happen through Iran, I guess would be my prediction based on the petrodollar lens, right? Which it's not an exciting prospect.
No, it's a disaster. Yeah, we can't keep doing this, using the military to go into these countries and destabilize it. Yeah, I really hope it does not come to that. I agree with Smith. That would be a terrible look for the Donald if we got involved in some war with the Iranians. Man. I don't know why we can't. I'm sure that there are very real, like when you think about the realpolitik that Donald's facing, there must be reasons why he is willing to risk his popularity, risk his legacy, risk everything to do the Israelis' bidding.
The whole like America First platform that he ran on is like extremely antithetical to propping up Israel.
Yes, yeah, it will be the exact opposite.
So,
yeah.
There are like some powerful forces kind of pushing at each other. So I guess like ultimately it'd be interesting to see how it shakes out. And like ultimately, I guess the question of Donald Trump's legacy will be like how he negotiates these crazy forces. And I don't even know how much power he really has to do so. But I do think like the immigration stuff has been disappointing to say the least. And so I guess I'm more excited about the tariffs than I am about like the immigration stuff. It seems completely insane. But I mean, the good news is that like the public support really has changed since October 7th regarding Israel. So I mean, maybe the writing is on the wall, and Donald Trump can somehow like land this airplane in some way that isn't cataclysmic.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was just telling me on the Tucker Pod that he was just singing the praises of the Doge and all of the cuts they're making. But that makes me think we're looking at a Charlie Brown in the football situation here, because you look at if you double click on the Doge thing, it's like, okay, I don't really believe that they're wildly overstating the amount of savings that they're actually bringing about here. And then the Republicans passed a budget. Mentioned the CR mentioned by Smith, recently on that clip. Like they passed a budget that like just gives tax cuts to the wealthy that are like twice the magnitude of any money, even the top line number the Doge claims it's saving us. So it's like I don't think these people have any they're not seriously tackling the deficit. And I don't know if they're seriously trying to help the middle class either. That's what makes me think maybe there's some angle we're not seeing here where this is another scam to fleece the middle and lower classes and enrich the already wealthy, which is, what we do in America. So I'm just looking for that angle because that's what I'm used to.
Well, in Donald Trump, he's always like been in bed with these banking interests, and like Jared Kushner is some kind of like banker, right? Who like Ivanka Trump is married to.
Good question. I don't know what he does for a living, but maybe he is, yeah.
Well, isn't he like some kind of Israeli banker or something? Maybe we should. Can we fact check it right here?
I'm going to pull up Jared Kushner on the internet and just see what it has to say. Find out if this man is connected to finance or not. Businessman and former senior advisor. It just says he's a businessman here on Wikipedia.
Well, it's hard to make sense. In any case, but what forces were behind trying to assassinate Donald Trump? I mean, is it? You could say it's a lone gunman if it just happened once. So who's trying to Is it really some kind of Iranian assassin, or is it the forces trying to resist the American empire? I mean, you could say it's some kind of Russian, Chinese, Iranian coalition that's trying to have Donald Trump shot because maybe they know that Donald Trump is the ultimate Israeli petrodollar shill, and we are about to get Lucy'd harder than we've ever been before.
Yeah, I don't know. The fact that Donald is playing ball so willingly with the foreign policy goals of the Israelis, and then the fact that he was nearly assassinated twice is I don't quite know how to fit all these pieces together. Very interesting.
Well, Dave Smith was saying how he'll be eminently disappointed if Donald Trump goes to war with Iran. I'm just not really sure how much of a choice he has, but of course, I mean, he probably just has to go to war with Iran is my thinking based on this petrodollar lens, and so you could be disappointed in him. But it's just an inevitability. If it was an R or a D in there, I think it would be playing out much the same way, right?
Sure, yeah. Smith also brought up the Donald's bombing of Yemen, which you referenced a moment ago with the signal scandal. But interestingly, Biden was bombing the same people, and so it doesn't matter who you elected. You left an R or a D, you're still going to get the foreign policy prescription that our betters have made for us, and not another. But it is our job to oppose going to war with everything we have, right? We got to oppose wars on this podcast, and when we talk to people outside the podcast, and we can't let it happen, right? We can try everything we can to. Well, we the public have to be vociferously opposed to something horrible like a war with Iran, right? Ugh. I mean, man.
Well, I think we'll be a much happier civilization when we get past this. Or a much happier empire, or a much happier country when we get past the petrodollar. But
I think the American empire is the petrodollar. We'll have no more empire. We won't be able to get other people. We won't be able to, get other people to send us their goods and send them funny money in return. We'll have, like you say, a much different kind of economy. Maybe that's for the best, but I don't know. It's hard to believe that the Donald has the best interests of the lower and middle classes at heart. But because the Democrats have totally in dereliction of their duty, this is all no one's going to ever elect the Democrats until they start actually proposing economic. We need some actual economic proposals to refloat the middle and lower classes. All of the having a middle class is like a weird historical occurrence.
Anomaly.
Yeah, it's usually a tiny number of people have all the wealth, and everyone else scratches the surface of the earth for their subsistence, and that's the way that it is. And indeed, that's the way that it was in America up until the early part of the 20th century. And and we're quickly reverting to the historical mean here. We it was Ben Franklin. I said it was Ben Franklin who I believe said America is a republic if you can keep it, and that's a good. We the middle and lower classes have allowed that historical anomaly, that we were like the envy of the world for our middle class, and we let it slip away because we don't have a Marxist lens with which to understand what's happening. And so the Democrats, the only thing they can do to be popular, right, it's all well and good for the Republicans, the party of business owners, to pull as hard as they can for tax cuts for the wealthy and for deregulation, but we need a counterbalance to that. And the Democrats have not been a counterbalance. They have been, every bit as complicit in the destruction of the middle class as the Republicans have. And so we're just left with, we've got no counterbalance to whatever the Donald's Donald's got going on here. So I guess we just kind of have to hope for the best.
Yeah, well, the Democrats also need to extract as much wealth as they can from the middle class to support the petrodollar, basically.
They're donors, the party donors.
So so there's just some interesting threads here, and by interesting, like Doom and Armageddon maybe are on the horizon, or I don't know, man. I guess we're gonna see. Yep.
Well, I will say this by way of closing here, Brian. I used to be a lot worse off mentally because it just seemed like there was no. My financial situation was a total disaster because of unpayable student loan debt that's also dischargeable in bankruptcy court. So you can't really do it. You just have to kind of exist in this hopeless state. But even though things are significantly more disturbing and less settled now, I still find it refreshing that at least things are happening. At least people are on podcasts talking about petrodollars and the Israeli lobby and Israeli foreign policy
and communism
and Marxism, and at least things are happening, and there is at least a broad recognition that we have some problem. 10, 12, 13, 14 years ago, in the first Obama term, there was no recognition that we had some serious problem simmering under the surface. And so I guess for all of us who are major losers in the current economic order, I mean, we should be at least a little bit excited that at least there's broad recognition that we have a fundamental problem afoot. Even if it's hard to tell what that problem, even if it's hard to tell, people have trouble determining the nature of the problem and therefore what solutions might be in order. At least we're talking about the fact that there's problems. So I don't know. I guess I don't feel too doom and gloom despite all of the excitement on Wall Street this past week, eh?
And at least there's a lot of pushback on there. I mean, obviously Dave Smith endorsed Donald Trump, but he is he's on, and Joe Rogan had him on too and basically gave him his endorsement as well, but they're also pushing back against what Donald Trump's doing here, the saber rattling with Iran and whatnot. So that's certainly good to hear. And I mean, is Donald Trump just gonna betray all those interests or what? I don't know. It'll be fascinating to see how it plays out.
I always bring this up, but there's an old Irish blessing and curse that says, "May you live in interesting times." And we surely are, eh, Brian?
Yes.
Alrighty, folks. Well, with that, we shall conclude this exciting episode of the System Failure Podcast. If you would like to send us a note on anything we missed or your opinions on what you heard today, please do so. You can get in touch with either Brian or myself over at systemfailure.org. And also over at systemfailure.org, you can sign up to receive weekly essays written by yours truly about some of the hidden and obscure history of finance. Those essays are published every Monday, and like I said, you can put in your email address to receive them, and that way receive them in your email inbox, and that way you shan't have to worry about ever missing one. Again, all that is waiting for you over at systemfailure.org.
All right.
Alrighty, folks, have a great week. We'll talk to you.